This is the Angelbird AV Pro SX CFExpress Type B card. And today we're talking about who needs such a fast card. Welcome back to another video. My name is Nikos. Today we're talking about Angelbird's AV Pro SX card. This is a super fast card, and they're doing some good branding here. Now, the idea is very simple. You need a fast card. Well, what do? You spend a lot of money for it. Now, this card comes in at 1480 megabytes per second on a sustained write speed, which is what you need for all these super fast cameras that have been released lately, especially these flagship ones, where you're able to utilize the speed of such a fast card. Now, typically you'd go out and spend an arm and a leg for it, but this one's only coming in at 179, which is phenomenal. Now, the caveat to that is that it's only 160 gigabytes. And the idea behind this is that it's made for photographers who want to take super fast photos. And at that, know that they're going to be up to 160 gigabytes in photos and then have to swap out that card because it's not a lot of space if you ask me. However, they're making this accessible to the market, which is totally awesome. Before, we didn't have that opportunity. You either had a super fast, expensive card, or you had a super budget-friendly, slow card. So the idea of these cards, when you're looking at it from a perspective of going for this, is 1785 megabytes per second on the read and 1600 on the write. So whenever you're looking at cards, you want to look at the sustained write speed, however. So that 1485 megabytes per second just kills it. It's awesome. It's what you need for a super fast camera. Now, the idea is very simple, however. We got to touch up on this. Most people will buy this card thinking that their camera will achieve that speed, and in most cases, they won't. That's it. Why? Because they'll purchase something like the Canon R5 like I did. You'll throw this card in there and you're expecting 20 photos per second because you've seen your favorite creators talk about how it hits 20 frames per second, but then you realize that's like the best case scenario if you put it at a certain setting with Wi-Fi off, no autofocus, and all this other stuff. The camera actually can't achieve that speed unless you do all that because the buffer is just not fast enough. That's it, with all the settings on the camera. So we have to take this with a grain of salt and understand what are our limitations with any card. Now, the sustained write speed for video, this will knock everything out of the park, but you technically don't even need anything more than 400 megabytes per second on pretty much any camera right now, I think. Don't quote me on that, but I think I know by next year we're going to know that we're going to need like 600 or something like that, and you're going to be like, so we got to look at the idea of when we're buying cards, are we okay for the future? Are we going to be investing in this, or are we just spending our money right now? And yes, they do have several cards. They've released a whole bunch of them. I am doing reviews on all of them. I will leave links below, so do subscribe. And the idea here is very simple. Who needs this card? Well, I can't really look at this and be like, hey, is it just for flagships? The card does a great job. So I'm going to show you some numbers first, then we're going to come back to really looking at who is this card for. Looking at the numbers is going to allow us to understand how our camera is functioning. And of course, it's going to allow us to put in perspective what card do we really need. So you're going to look at these numbers and then compare them to your camera and see what you're able to do with that buffer. And of course, how the camera can handle the actual writing on the box. So first we're going to look at the recovery of the buffer. That is how long it takes for it to empty. So if you hold down the shutter, you take a whole bunch of pictures, and then you let it recover so you can take more pictures. Now, in some cases, you'll be able to continue taking pictures as it's emptying, but that's all based on what your type of photography at that moment is. And in most cases, when you have 20 frames per second, like I do with the Canon R5, you're technically only using that if you're trying not to miss a moment and you need those shots all together. So something like, sport game and other things like, fast action pace. Now, the numbers are close. These are like very, very close, and they are negligible. I ran this test a whole bunch of times, and in all cases, except for one, it tended to be that this would recover just a fraction or a smidgen, you would say, quicker. So negligible at the end of the day. When we look at the buffer being filled with RAW, you're filling it up in 4.76 seconds. That is holding down the button and letting it fill up until it hits that 0 and the buffer's filled, and you get about 80 photos. In contrast to C RAW, you're getting about 127.6 photos. So if you look at that thought process, it takes 7.64 seconds to actually fill that buffer, and just, you know, at the end of the day, I don't know many people that shoot with C RAW. I know consumers do, but usually people are shooting with RAW. When we're looking at the buffer being filled in the images per second, we're getting about 16.82 images per second on the RAW and 16.7 on the C RAW. So this is you filling up the buffer because you're holding down that button and you're letting it go right down to 0 on that camera. 16.82 for the RAW. I couldn't get that 20 frames per second, period. You can't sustain that for the whole time, okay? Not with the Canon R5. Now, on a 3-second burst, you're getting 17.62 images per second. This is where the card is cold. When we have been running the camera for about a minute, so say you were recording and they're switching over to take photos, you're gonna get a little bit of a decrease at 17.2. Now, this is negligible if you think about it. Overall, the card is handling the situation pretty nice. And if you put this into perspective, this would be a more realistic idea that you're not going to be just holding down that buffer, holding down that button and filling that buffer, but you're going to be doing about, 1, 2, 3 second bursts. So you're averaging in around 17.62, and with the camera on, 17.22. So you're not losing that much from the card. The card is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Now, this is ideal for those people that shoot hybrid and are doing something where they're switching over to video, back to photos, back to video, and you're really putting your camera to stress. You're not just sitting there taking photos, putting the camera down, taking photos. So when we're looking at that idea of the recovery of the buffer, this is where that plays out, because the idea would be that if I wanted to switch to video, I want to know that the buffer is cleared, because it won't let you switch over to video until that buffer clears. So that's something where we're looking at these numbers and we're just making sure that we understand our camera. Now, this is the camera being super hot with HQ mode, running the camera over 20 minutes, and literally we see a decrease, but it's average right across the board for all the type of cards from the Angelbird line. Now, the SanDisk, I threw this for reference so you can see that SanDisk, with the heating issues it has, it did drop to 13.64. So this is something that you should be thinking about when you're looking at different types of cards. Are they performing in actual real world? Because we can make any claims we want, but real world is where it's at. Now, in comparison to the other cards I've been testing, I gotta tell you, this is performing to whatever the camera can perform at. So I can't fully test it unless I have a flagship from Canon. And I did confirm with the ordinary filmmaker on why this camera was not performing. It is the buffer. Okay, I confirmed with them, and of course with the company, I reached out to them. I sent them my numbers, and they confirmed a lot of the information that I had. We walked through different scenarios, and it is the camera's limitation. So even though this $5,000 camera, Canadian money, was supposed to shoot 20 frames per second, it doesn't. So when you do see the specialist in the creative land going, hey, I just took 20 frames right there, that's not accurate. It isn't. And you got to take everything people say with a grain of salt, including me. You should be doing all these kind of tests with any gear you buy to make sure you bought the right gear and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Sit down and do the test so you know, hey, should I return it or not? Now, with this card, this does reach the speeds it's supposed to be reaching. I confirmed it with ordinary filmmaker. We got into a little bit of an email back and forth to figure out what is the specifics that I'm experiencing, and when the flagship is tested and put to the test with this card, it performs. It does perform. So you're looking at this and saying, who needs this card? That's the question. With 160 gigabytes, it's an entry level for space. You can buy a couple of these and go and do your job that you need to do when you're out in the field. In real world application, it will make sure it maxes out your camera and you're going to be able to achieve what you need to be achieving. But from whom 160 gigabytes is enough, I don't know. Now, the reason being that you're going to use the speed on this card when you're using it in electronic shutter, in the case of the Canon R5, and you're holding it down for 20 images per second. If you have one of the other flagships that goes to 30, you're going to be holding it down for 30 images per second. And I sit there and I go, they're 40, 50, 60 megabytes per image, and this will fill up fast. Now, in my experience, this is filled up, I blink and it's filled up, and you expect it to be more. And you blink and like literally you're like, oh my god, what just happened? Like I don't have any space. So then you have to swap this out right away, and be, you have to be really attentive to how you're using your machines, be your tools, because you can be missing a moment because this just filled. And a lot of the times with the Canon R5, I'm still getting used to it. When I'm holding this down, and same with the R6, when I'm holding it down in electronic mode, it fills up, like you don't even realize it, and all of a sudden that buffer is filled. This is why I was doing these tests. You're sitting there, you're like, oh my god, I just filled. So that's something we got to look at. If you're going to buy this card, it has to be specific to your needs, of whatever those needs are. So if you really need this for a flagship, then yes, like that's the go-to card in that case for the price point at 179. And I mean, then you have to ask yourself, how many do you need for a shoot? Okay, so if you're out there for an hour, 2 hours, okay, you're going to get away with this depending on what you're shooting, but like you're gonna need a couple of these. And at that point, you're gonna ask yourself, do I go for this and a few of these or several of these? Or do I look at the price point of the bigger cards, like the XT versions that they have on their website, and ask myself, hey, is that the direction I need to go and save my money up for that, or budget towards that, or maybe pick up a few of these to get going with your new camera, because at the end of the day, you're spending an arm and a leg, and then looking at it and saying, I'm gonna buy the higher capacity, faster cards. So the thoughts here is like, it's a limited amount of people that would be needing to buy this card and use it. And of course, in comparison to the other cards, these ones will work great with the Canon R5. I haven't had any issues. I'm looking at them and saying the fact that you need more video space with big cameras like this, you won't be able to shoot a lot of video with this unless you're doing 1080p, for instance. So if you are one of those professionals that uses 1080p, then yeah, but if you're getting into 4K land, then the SC card might be better, because yeah, you're sacrificing on the images, but on a Canon R5, for instance, you're not going to be needing that speed anyways. So you wouldn't be looking at this card for a Canon R5. Now, when you're looking at the R3 and then the R1, that changes things, and you got to put that in perspective, which is something that I've been thinking about and putting into perspective, because I'm saying to myself, well, what's next for me, right? Do I buy the R5C that came out? Because video is more me. But then I sit there and I go, what if the R1 comes out and it's like $2,000 more or $3,000 more, and maybe that's the camera I use for the next 3 years? Like for me, I'm thinking about it in terms of investment, and maybe that's the route I'm going to take. In that case, then yes, I'm going to probably want to have something like this hanging around, and or have one of the XT cards. And that's the kind of questions you got to look at. You got to look at your bit rate. You got to ask yourself, what is best case scenario? So good card overall. I think it suits somebody specific. It's an entry level for anybody that buys a flagship camera, and it is a overall reliable, from what I've seen, with the company sticking by their word. And they want to know, hey, what's performing, let's look at your data, and they're sticking by the product, which is awesome, and the support has been awesome. So from a reliability standpoint, with them saying, hey, we're there for you, it's super awesome. Now the long term, I don't know. I will be testing it out. I know people have had the MK1 version of the Pro cards, which is this one, right here. And I've been testing this out. You do need to update this one if you have an older version, so it doesn't lock up your camera. And at that, you do need to remember that if you buy any of these cards, that you're going to have to buy the card reader in order to do any firmware updates down the road. So put that into perspective as well when you're upgrading into any kind of like card that is Angelbird. Now, I know some other makers do something similar, so it's fair. And they explain it to me in a way where the technology makes sense of why they do that. So I'm not taking that away from them as a negative. And but long term, that's the question: is it going to be reliable? Like I've had reliability with other, like SanDisk, for instance, that was reliable. Now I don't feel they're as reliable, and I think it's because they're not communicating and they're not providing the support. So you're seeing that in this company. So if you're looking at this camera and at this card, and you're saying, should I buy it? Should I not? I would look at all the different cards. I would look at it in terms of workflow. I would look at it in terms of, do I need certain aspects of the different cards? And then how does that workflow change in the future? How does that workflow move from me doing what I'm doing now to the next level of me with my workflow? When I'm looking at it, I'm now saying, hey, if the Canon R1 comes out, it's got 2 cards in it, then what? because that's one of my gripes with this one. I'm just like, oh, why does it have an SD card? Like, a CFExpress and SD card. Like, why? And it was basically because there were there weren't enough cheap cards out there in the CFExpress world, so that they don't want to lose money. That's why they did that. They don't want to lose people saying, hey, I don't want to upgrade, because then I have to upgrade my cards again. That's like $2,000. Now we got an entry of like $800 if you need to be completely backed up, and if you just need one card, it's $179. So I mean, now things are changing. I think more camera makers are going to switch to 2 cards. So then I sit there and I think about it. I'm like, well, what's going to happen when I'm going out and I got to buy more cards later on, or do I invest into it moving forward in this direction? So things to think about. Of course, workflow is king, and of course, look at it in a whole perspective of budget, because that's why we make this, these videos and this channel. You got to look at your budget, and you got to look at how you're going to grow your business, how you're going to grow your skill set, and not allow budget to get in the way. My name is Nikos. Leave a like, subscribe, and check out the videos below for all the reviews on these different cards, and of course, check out these 2 videos.